The steel doors slammed shut with a metallic echo that rattled through the concrete halls of Stonewall Correctional Facility, a place where hope came to die and only the strongest survived. The inmates turned their heads as the new guy walked in, tall, calm, with eyes that had seen more than any man should. He didn't flinch at the catcalls, didn't answer the mocking laughter. He just kept walking, every step steady, every breath controlled. No one knew his name yet, but they all knew one thing: he didn't look scared. And in a place like this, that alone was enough to make enemies. Welcome to Swift Tale, where real-life stories meet heart-pounding lessons of courage, redemption, and justice. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just another prison story. It's a story about the kind of strength that can't be measured by muscle or power. Let me ask you a question before we dive in. Do you believe people can truly change after hitting rock bottom? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because by the end of this story, you might just see the answer differently. Today's story is about a man named Malik Johnson, a new inmate who walked into a violent world ruled by a ruthless prison gang leader named Rico. Within these walls, Rico was king, feared, respected, and known for breaking men's spirits the moment they arrived. But when Malik stepped into his world, everything began to shift. What no one, not Rico, not the guards, not even Malik's cellmate, knew was that this quiet, calm newcomer had once been someone extraordinary. Before the bars, before the orange jumpsuit, Malik was a professional boxer, a man who fought for world titles and trained under bright lights before fate dragged him into darkness. This story isn't just about fists or fights. It's about pride, redemption, and what happens when a man learns that true power isn't about how hard you hit. It's about knowing when not to. It's about how, even in the darkest corners of the world, a single man's silence can echo louder than the loudest violence. Because sometimes, the strongest warriors aren't the ones who strike back, they're the ones who rise above. So sit back, get ready, and stay with me until the end. What happens next inside these prison walls will challenge everything you think you know about strength, forgiveness, and second chances. This is the story of how a prison gang leader made the mistake of beating a new black inmate, without realizing he was facing a former boxing champion who had already learned life's hardest lesson, that real champions fight not to destroy, but to rise. The prison yard buzzed with noise, weights clanging, men shouting, guards barking orders, but all of it faded as Malik Johnson stepped through the gates of general population. The sun burned down on the cracked concrete, and rows of eyes turned toward him like wolves sizing up fresh meat. He wore the same orange jumpsuit as everyone else, yet there was something about the way he carried himself, quiet confidence, straight posture, no trace of fear, that made him stand out immediately. Some inmates whispered, others laughed, but Malik kept his eyes forward, his face unreadable. He wasn't there to make friends, and he definitely wasn't there to prove anything. Inside Stonewall Correctional, everything ran on an unspoken hierarchy. At the top sat Rico, the self-proclaimed king of the yard, a man who had built his empire on intimidation, loyalty, and blood. No one crossed Rico without paying a price. The moment Malik entered, Rico noticed him from across the yard, leaning against the pull-up bar, muscles gleaming with sweat and tattoos telling stories of violence. He squinted, watching Malik take his first slow walk across the compound. "Fresh fish," one of Rico's men muttered. Rico just smirked. "Yeah," he said, "but he ain't swimming long." Malik was assigned to a small two-man cell on D Block, a section known for housing Rico's enforcers. His cellmate, a thin, jittery man named Tino, looked him up and down nervously when he arrived. "You knew?" Tino asked, voice trembling. Malik gave a slow nod, setting his few possessions on the shelf, a Bible, a folded photo of a little girl, and a worn paperback novel. "Keep your head low," Tino whispered. "Don't look at Rico, don't talk back, don't." But Malik had already closed his eyes, sitting on his bunk in silence, as if trying to block out the noise of the world around him. The first night was restless. Malik lay awake, listening to the constant hum of the prison, distant shouts, the metallic clang of gates, the sound of boots on concrete. He wasn't afraid, but he could feel the tension pressing in from all sides. In this place, weakness was hunted, and strength was always tested. He knew what was coming. He had seen it before, men sizing each other up, waiting for the right moment to strike. By morning, the rumors had already started spreading. "New guy's quiet," someone said. "Too quiet," another added. "He walks like he knows how to fight." The gossip reached Rico's table during breakfast. He glanced over at Malik, who sat alone, calmly eating, eyes down, shoulders relaxed. Rico hated that look, the kind that said, "I don't fear you, but I don't need to prove it either." It reminded him of the old fighters he used to see on TV, men who didn't talk, just acted. Later that day, while the inmates were out in the yard, Rico decided to introduce himself. He walked over, his crew following close behind like shadows. "Yo, new guy," he called out. Malik looked up slowly, his gaze calm, almost polite. "You got a name?" Rico asked, stepping closer. "Malik," he replied evenly. Rico chuckled. "Malik, huh? You been inside before?" Malik shook his head. "First time." Rico smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Then here's your first lesson, rookie. This yard's mine. You walk, you talk, you breathe in here because I let you. Got it?" Malik didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just looked at Rico and said, "Understood." Then he walked away. For a moment, Rico stood there frozen, not used to being dismissed, not used to someone turning their back on him. His crew shifted uncomfortably, waiting for his reaction. Rico's jaw clenched. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see how long he stays cool when things heat up." As Malik continued across the yard, he could feel eyes on him, whispers trailing behind like smoke. But he didn't care. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to survive, to serve his time, to maybe, just maybe, find a sliver of peace in the chaos. Still, deep down, a part of him knew peace doesn't come easy in a place like Stonewall. And no matter how much you try to avoid it, violence has a way of finding you, especially when it thinks you're hiding something. In every prison, there's always one man who rules without wearing a badge. And at Stonewall, that man was Rico Morales. To the guards, he was inmate 51,209, but to everyone else behind those steel bars, he was the law, the judge, and the executioner. Rico had been locked up for nearly a decade, but somehow he lived better than most. He controlled the flow of contraband, decided who got protection, and even had a few guards in his pocket. He didn't need to shout to be heard. One glare from him was enough to silence an entire cell block. Rico was built like a wall, broad shoulders, arms covered in tattoos that told stories of gangs, blood, and lost brothers. Across his chest, inked in thick black letters, were the words, "Only God judges me." He had earned that reputation through years of dominance, taking down anyone who challenged his authority. To survive in Stonewall, you either stood behind Rico or stayed out of his sight. But lately, things had grown stale. He'd crushed every challenger, broken every rebel spirit, until Malik Johnson walked in. The first time Rico saw Malik up close, he noticed something strange. The new guy didn't act like the others. Most men in Stonewall walked with their eyes down, shoulders hunched, every move cautious. But Malik, he walked straight, slow, confident, like a man who'd already made peace with his demons, and that irritated Rico more than he cared to admit. "Who the hell does he think he is?" Rico muttered one day, watching Malik from a distance. Malik was doing push-ups in the corner of the yard, methodically, perfectly, not rushing like the others. Tiny, one of Rico's lieutenants, chuckled. "Man, just keeping in shape. Let him be." Rico's jaw tightened. "Ain't about being in shape. It's the way he moves, like he knows something we don't." In Stonewall, respect came through fear, and Rico had spent years building an empire based on that. His word was law, his crew unbreakable. There was Tiny, built like a tank with more scars than teeth. Snake, the wiry one with quick hands and quicker lies. And Cruz, the quiet observer, always 2 steps behind Rico, doing his dirty work without question. Together, they made sure no one stepped out of line. And now, Rico had his sights on Malik. For the next few days, Rico watched. He studied Malik, how he moved, who he talked to, what he ate, even how he breathed. He was waiting for the moment Malik would slip, give him a reason to teach a lesson. But Malik never did. He kept to himself, spent most of his time in the yard or reading in the library. Even when other inmates tried to provoke him, shoulder bumps, insults, stolen food trays, Malik stayed calm. That calmness made Rico furious. In prison, silence was power, and Malik's quiet confidence was louder than any threat Rico could make. One night Rico sat in his cell, the flicker of a stolen lighter casting shadows on the wall. "He thinks he's better than me," he muttered. "Man walks around like he's above it all." Cruz, sitting across from him, shrugged. "Maybe he's just trying to do his time." Rico laughed darkly. "Ain't no man just does his time in here. Everybody's hiding something." That night Rico made up his mind. He would test Malik, see what the new guy was really made of. Not just with words, but with fists. In Stonewall, that was how respect was earned or taken. The next morning, Rico sent Tiny to accidentally bump into Malik in the chow line. The tray clattered to the floor, food splattering across Malik's shoes. The room went silent for a moment, everyone watching. Tiny grinned. "Watch where you're going, rookie." Malik looked down at the mess, then back up at Tiny. His eyes were calm, not angry, not afraid. "You should be more careful," Malik said softly. Then he picked up his tray and walked away. The cafeteria erupted with whispers. When Tiny reported back, Rico wasn't pleased. "He just walked off?" Rico asked. Tiny nodded, didn't even blink. Rico leaned back in his chair, a dangerous smirk curling his lips. "Good, that means he's got a line, and I'm gonna find where it breaks." But there was something else Rico didn't expect, the way the other inmates were starting to notice Malik. His quiet strength was drawing attention, earning a kind of respect Rico used to own. Men were watching how Malik carried himself, not through fear, but through discipline. It was subtle, but it was spreading. And Rico, who ruled through chaos, could feel his control slipping not by force, but by presence. That night, as the lights dimmed and the prison settled into uneasy silence, Rico sat on his bunk staring at the wall, fists clenched. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself, "tomorrow we see what kind of man you really are." Because in Rico's world, there was no room for mystery, only dominance. And he wasn't about to let anyone, not even a quiet stranger, walk into his kingdom and steal his crown. The next few days in Stonewall Correctional felt heavier than usual. The air was thicker, the stairs longer, and every sound seemed to carry a warning. Word had spread, Rico wasn't done with the new guy. Everyone knew what that meant. When Rico set his sights on someone, it wasn't a matter of if something would happen, but when. Malik, however, moved through the chaos as if he didn't notice. He woke before dawn, did his morning push-ups, jogged slow laps around the yard, and spent the afternoons in the library or writing letters. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and never raised his voice. His calmness was unsettling, not because it was weak, but because it was unshakable. In a world where anger ruled, peace was rebellion. At breakfast one morning, Malik sat alone at a corner table, slowly eating, when Snake, one of Rico's enforcers, slid into the seat across from him. Snake had the kind of grin that made your skin crawl, all sharp teeth and bad intentions. "You real quiet, new guy," he said, stabbing at his eggs with a fork. "Too quiet." Malik didn't look up. "Quiet keeps you alive." Snake leaned forward. "Or gets you killed, depends who you're quiet around." Malik finally met his gaze. "I've been quiet around worse." That line made Snake freeze for a moment. Something in Malik's tone, calm but cold, sent a flicker of doubt through him. Snake sneered, masking his unease. "You think you're tough?" Malik didn't answer. He stood up, tossed his tray away, and walked out without another word. Across the room, Rico watched the entire exchange, eyes narrowed. Later that day, as Malik returned to his cell, he found a note on his bunk. It was written on torn notebook paper, scrawled in rough handwriting. "You got nerve, rookie. Let's see if you got heart. Yard tomorrow." No name, no signature, but Malik knew exactly who it was from. That night, Malik sat on his bunk, staring at the paper, the flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzing like a wasp. His cellmate Tino peeked over nervously. "That from Rico?" Malik didn't answer. "Man, you gotta tell the guards," Tino whispered. "He don't play. You don't want to end up in the infirmary." Malik folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his Bible. "I'm not here to fight," he said softly. "Then don't go," Tino urged. Malik looked up, eyes calm but resolute. "Some fights find you whether you want them or not." As the prison lights dimmed, Malik lay awake, thoughts swirling. He thought about his daughter, her smile, her voice on the last visit when she said, "Daddy, come home soon." He thought about the last fight he'd ever been in outside these walls, the one that changed everything. The one that sent a man to the hospital and Malik to prison. He vowed never to raise his fists again unless he had to. But some promises are easier to make than to keep. The next morning, tension rippled through the yard like static. The inmates could feel it. Something was about to go down. Rico stood with his crew near the pull-up bars, arms crossed, eyes locked on Malik as he walked out of the block. Malik's steps were steady, unhurried. He knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. Rico had set the stage, and everyone was watching. "Yo, Malik," Rico called out across the yard, voice booming. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. "You been walking around here like you own the place. You forget whose yard this is?" Malik stopped a few feet away, looked at him and said, "No one owns this place. We're all just doing time." A murmur spread through the crowd. No one talked to Rico like that, not unless they had a death wish. Rico stepped closer, a smirk playing on his lips. "You got jokes, huh? That's cute. You think you're better than us?" Malik shook his head. "No, just different." Rico's smile vanished. "Different, huh? We'll see how different you are when you're picking your teeth off the ground." His men laughed, but Malik didn't move. His hands stayed at his sides, calm as ever. "I don't want trouble," he said. "Then you walked into the wrong yard," Rico shot back. The guards noticed the tension, but didn't intervene. They'd seen this dance before. To them, it was just another power game. But to the inmates, this was something else, two worlds colliding. The predator and the man who refused to be prey. As Malik walked away, Rico called after him, "Tomorrow, me, don't run." Malik didn't turn around. "I don't run," he said quietly. That night Malik sat in silence, his mind steady but his heart heavy. He wasn't afraid of Rico, he was afraid of himself. He knew what his hands could do, how much damage one wrong move could cause. He'd spent years controlling that part of him, burying it deep. But now, it was being dragged back to the surface. He picked up the photo of his daughter, tracing the edges with his thumb. "I'm not that man anymore," he whispered. But deep down he knew tomorrow, the world would try to prove him wrong. The next day dawned heavy and grey, as though even the sky above Stonewall Correctional sensed what was coming. The guards opened the yard gates, and men flooded out into the cold morning air, some pretending to work out, others just watching, waiting. Everyone knew what was about to happen. When Rico called someone out, there was only one way it ended. Malik stepped into the yard, silent as ever. He wore the same plain orange jumpsuit, the same worn shoes. But today his calm was different. It wasn't peaceful, it was sharp, focused, like the quiet that comes before a storm. Across the yard, Rico stood surrounded by his crew, Tiny, Snake, and Cruz, grinning like hunters waiting for the kill. "Look who showed up," Rico called, spreading his arms. "Didn't think you'd have the guts." Malik stopped a few feet away. "You wanted me here, I'm here," he said evenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried steady, controlled, every word measured. Rico's men began to circle him, forming a loose ring. The other inmates kept their distance, pretending not to look, but keeping their eyes fixed on the scene. The guards leaned against the fence, pretending to be bored, but they were watching too. "You got a smart mouth for a quiet man," Rico said, stepping forward. "Let's see what else you got." Malik shook his head slowly. "You don't want to do this." That made Rico laugh. "Don't want to? You think I'm asking?" He nodded to Tiny. "Show him how we handle disrespect." Tiny cracked his knuckles and lunged. Malik didn't move until the last second, then sidestepped with a speed that seemed impossible in such a small space. Tiny's punch hit air, his balance faltering. In a blur, Malik's elbow snapped back, one clean strike to the ribs. Tiny gasped, dropping to one knee. The crowd murmured. Snake came next, fast and wild, swinging low. Malik ducked, pivoted, and tapped him across the jaw, just enough to make him stumble backward. He wasn't fighting to destroy, he was fighting to end it quickly, efficiently. Every move was precise, every hit controlled. Cruz hesitated, glancing at Rico. Rico growled, "Get him!" Cruz rushed in, but Malik caught his arm mid-swing, twisted, and sent him sprawling face first into the dirt. The yard went silent, except for the dull thud of bodies hitting concrete. Now it was just Malik and Rico. Rico glared at him, breathing hard, fists clenched. "You think that scares me?" he spat. "I've been fighting my whole damn life." Malik's expression didn't change. "Then you should know when to stop." That line burned deep. Rico roared and charged forward, swinging a hard right hook. Malik slipped to the side, his movement effortless, fluid. Another swing, Malik blocked it with his forearm and countered with a short, clean jab to the chest. Rico stumbled back but didn't fall. He lunged again, wilder this time. Malik ducked under and with a single, swift motion, delivered a punch to Rico's midsection that knocked the wind from his lungs. Rico collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Malik stepped back, breathing steady. Around them, silence hung thick. Even the guards didn't move. Malik looked down at Rico, not with triumph, but pity. "This isn't strength," Malik said quietly. You think breaking people makes you powerful. It doesn't, it just makes you hollow. Rico looked up, eyes burning with anger and something else, confusion. No one had ever talked to him like that before. Malik turned and started to walk away. But Rico, too proud to accept defeat, snarled and reached for the shank hidden in his waistband. A glint of metal flashed, and before anyone could react, Malik spun, catching Rico's wrist mid-swing. The sound of bone cracking echoed across the yard. The blade clattered to the ground. Malik twisted, forcing Rico down face first into the dirt. "Don't," Malik warned, voice low but commanding. Rico froze. Guards rushed in then, shouting orders, batons drawn, forcing everyone back. "Break it up, everybody down." Malik released Rico and raised his hands slowly, offering no resistance. Rico lay on the ground, clutching his arm, breathing hard. Humiliation etched across his face. They dragged Malik away, but the damage, or perhaps the revelation, was done. Every man in that yard had just seen what true control looked like. Malik hadn't just won the fight, he'd owned it, without rage, without cruelty. It wasn't violence that made him dangerous, it was restraint. As the guards led him back to his cell, the whispers began to spread. "That new guy, he moved like a pro. Did you see his stance? He's no regular dude." The story grew with every retelling. By dinner, half the prison already knew. The new inmate who took down Rico wasn't some random rookie. He was something else entirely. That night, as Malik sat in solitary, bruised but calm, he heard the echo of his old coach's voice in his mind. "A real fighter doesn't fight to win. He fights to prove he can walk away." Malik smiled faintly. He walked away again. But he knew this wasn't over, because a man like Rico didn't take humiliation lightly. And tomorrow, the walls of Stonewall would whisper a name no one had said in years: Malik "Iron Fist" Johnson. By sunrise, the entire prison was buzzing with a rumor that moved faster than contraband. From the kitchen to the infirmary, from D-Block to the yard, everyone was whispering about the same thing: the new guy dropped Rico. Some said he was an ex-soldier, others claimed he used to be a hitman. But the truth, as always, was stranger and more powerful than the whispers. Rico sat in the infirmary with his arm in a sling, his pride shattered more than his bones. Tiny and Snake avoided his eyes. Even his most loyal men didn't know what to say. No one had ever seen their boss beaten like that, not just physically but mentally. Malik hadn't just fought him, he'd humbled him. Rico replayed the fight over and over in his head. The way Malik moved, the precision of his strikes, the control in his breathing. Those weren't prison brawler moves. Those were professional. Meanwhile, Malik was back in his cell, quiet as ever. Solitary confinement hadn't broken him, it had given him time to think. He wasn't proud of what happened, but he didn't regret defending himself either. He knew what violence could do, how it could twist a man's soul, and he'd spent years trying to bury that part of himself. But Stonewall had a way of digging up the past you tried hardest to forget. Later that week, when he was finally released back into general population, the yard went still the moment he stepped out. Every eye followed him. Some looked with awe, others with fear. But one man, sitting near the bleachers, squinted, studying Malik closely. He was an older inmate named Jerome "Pops" Harris, a former trainer who had once worked with pro fighters before his own downfall. Pops leaned forward, whispering to the man next to him, "I'll be damned, that's Malik Johnson." The man frowned. "Who?" Pops chuckled, shaking his head. "Boy, you don't watch boxing? Malik Iron Fist Johnson, that's him. Used to fight on TV. Quickest hands I ever saw. Took out two-time champ Terrence Hammer Hall in the 4th round. Could have gone all the way if life hadn't chewed him up." The word spread like wildfire: Iron Fist Johnson. By dinner, the entire prison knew who he was. The man they thought was just another inmate had once been a boxing prodigy, a man who stood under bright lights while the crowd chanted his name. But fame, like freedom, is fragile. Malik's story, now making the rounds among inmates, was a mix of glory and tragedy. Years ago, Malik had risen from nothing. He grew up in South Chicago, raised by a single mother, fighting his way out of poverty one match at a time. He became a symbol of hope for the streets, disciplined, humble, unstoppable. But after a crooked manager robbed him blind and a personal tragedy sent him spiraling, his anger took over. One night outside a club, a brawl broke out. Malik tried to break it up, but one punch landed wrong. The man fell, hit his head, and never woke up. Manslaughter, 10 years, the price of one mistake. Back in the yard, Rico sat watching Malik from a distance. When he heard the whispers, the name Iron Fist, something shifted in him. It wasn't just disbelief, it was shame. He hadn't been humiliated by some nobody, he'd been humbled by a man who had already mastered the thing Rico craved most: control. That afternoon, Malik was sitting on the bench alone, reading, when Pops approached him. "Didn't think I'd ever see you in a place like this," Pops said with a small smile. Malik looked up, surprised, then recognized him. "Coach Harris," he said softly, "you still alive?" "Barely," Pops chuckled. "You still got those hands, I see." Malik closed the book. "Hands don't mean much in here, they only get you in trouble." Pops nodded slowly. "Or they get you respect." "I'm not looking for respect," Malik replied. "I just want peace," Pops sighed. "Peace don't come easy in a place like this, son, but maybe you being here, maybe you can remind some of these boys what real strength looks like." That night Rico couldn't sleep. He sat in his cell, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. For years he'd ruled Stonewall through fear, but Malik had changed the balance, not through threats, but through discipline. Rico had always thought power meant dominance, but what if he'd been wrong? The next day Rico found himself in the yard again. Malik was shadowboxing quietly near the fence, his movements smooth, almost graceful. Each jab, each pivot, each step, it was like watching water flow. No anger, no showboating, just control. Rico watched silent. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't name. Not rage, not hate, it was respect. He turned to Snake. "You see that?" Snake shrugged. "Man, just working out." Rico shook his head. "No, he's teaching." And he was right. Without realizing it, Malik had become something different in Stonewall, a symbol. His quiet strength, his composure, his past, all of it began to shift the prison's rhythm. The men who once fought for dominance began to watch him, imitate him. The yard started to calm. But for Malik, it wasn't about power anymore. It was about redemption. Every day, every breath, every punch thrown in the air was a reminder that strength without restraint was destruction, and that sometimes the hardest opponent to defeat wasn't another man, it was the one staring back at you in the mirror. The next few weeks inside Stonewall Correctional were unlike anything the prison guards had seen before. A strange calm began to settle over the yard. The usual shouting matches, the violent outbursts, the endless brawls, they started to fade. And at the center of it all was Malik Johnson, the man the inmates had once mocked as the new guy. Now they called him Champ. Every afternoon, when the sun stretched over the razor wire, Malik could be found in the far corner of the yard. His shadow dancing against the wall. He wasn't showing off, he was teaching. It started small. One curious kid from D-Block, a hot-headed 19-year-old named Dree, who asked Malik to show him how to throw a real punch. Malik studied the boy's stance, all anger and no balance, and said softly, "Fighting angry means you've already lost." At first, Dree didn't get it, but when Malik started to move, demonstrating the rhythm of real boxing, jab, pivot, breathe, the kid's expression changed. There was control in Malik's every motion, a kind of grace that didn't belong in a place like Stonewall. Word spread fast, Champ's teaching boxing in the yard. Within days, a dozen inmates were showing up to watch. By the end of the week, 24 were training beside him. Malik didn't just teach them how to fight. He taught them why not to. Between punches, he talked about breathing, focus, and control. "A real fighter," he said one day, "knows how to take a hit and still think. You lose your mind, you lose the fight. Same goes for life." The inmates listened, even the ones who never listened to anyone. They were tired of being angry, tired of being afraid. For once, someone was showing them another way to be strong. Rico watched from across the yard, arms folded. He didn't interfere. Something in him had changed since that day in the ring. He wasn't the same ruthless king of the block anymore. He was quieter now, more thoughtful. Snake tried to talk him into reclaiming his dominance. "You gonna let that dude take your spot?" Snake hissed. Rico looked over at Malik, surrounded by inmates learning discipline instead of chaos. "He didn't take my spot," Rico said. "He showed me I didn't have one to begin with." That answer stunned Snake, and it stunned Rico too. For years, Rico had ruled by fear, mistaking it for respect. But Malik's presence had exposed the difference. People feared Rico because they had to. They respected Malik because they wanted to. One morning, the warden called Malik into his office. He was a stern man with grey eyes and a reputation for breaking inmates' spirits. "You've caused quite a stir, Johnson," he said, flipping through a file. "Less fights, fewer disciplinary reports. Even the guards are saying the place feels different. What exactly are you doing out there?" Malik shrugged, "Teaching self-control." The warden smirked. "Control, huh? You think a few boxing lessons make a difference in a place like this?" Malik looked him straight in the eye. "It's not about the punches. It's about giving men something to fight for." For a moment, the warden said nothing. Then he closed the file. "Keep it up," he said quietly. "You might just do more good here than you ever did out there." Back in the yard, Malik's lessons became routine. Inmates from rival gangs trained side by side, sweating, laughing, learning. Even Rico began showing up at the edge of the ring, watching silently. One day, after everyone left, he approached Malik. "You ever gonna teach me how to move like that?" Rico asked. Malik smiled faintly. "You sure you're ready to learn?" Rico nodded. "I'm tired of fighting ghosts." That evening, under the fading sun, Malik stood face to face with the man who once tried to break him. He showed Rico how to breathe, how to stand, how to strike, and how to think. The two men moved in rhythm, teacher and student, fighter and former rival. For the first time in his life, Rico wasn't trying to prove anything. He was trying to understand. Days turned into weeks, and Stonewall began to change for good. Guards who once dreaded their shifts started noticing fewer lockdowns. Fights that would have exploded into riots ended before they began. Inmates who'd been enemies were now partners in training. The boxing sessions had become therapy, a silent rebellion against the violence that defined their lives. But Malik never forgot why he was there. At night, when the lights dimmed and the noise faded, he'd sit on his bunk and stare at his calloused hands, hands that once broke jaws for money, hands that once ended a man's life by accident. He whispered a quiet prayer for forgiveness, not for what he'd done, but for the years he'd wasted trying to outrun himself. Rico, too, began to change. He started reading, writing letters to his estranged son, and even apologizing to the men he'd hurt. It wasn't easy, redemption never is, but it was real. Malik's quiet strength had rippled through the walls of Stonewall, proving that even in the darkest places, light can find its way in. One night, Dree, the first kid Malik ever taught, said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. He said, "Before, this place taught us how to survive. Now it's teaching us how to live." And that was the moment Malik realized something profound. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was a teacher, a mentor, a spark of hope in a place built to extinguish it. The same fists that once destroyed were now rebuilding souls. What began as one man's fight for survival had turned into a quiet revolution, one that no gang, no warden, no wall could contain. For a time, peace held inside Stonewall Correctional. The yard was calmer, the air lighter, the violence almost dormant. But in prison, peace is fragile. One rumor, one misunderstanding, one spark can burn everything down. And that spark came on a cold Wednesday morning, just after breakfast, when an argument in the cafeteria lit the fuse. It started between two inmates, Dree, one of Malik's trainees, and a new arrival from C-Block named Vito, a hot-headed enforcer with something to prove. Words turned into shoves, shoves into fists, and within seconds, the entire cafeteria erupted into chaos. Trays flew, guards shouted, alarms blared. Malik, sitting a few tables away, saw it happen before most could blink. He jumped up, pulling Dree back, trying to calm him down, but Vito swung again, and Dree reacted on instinct. That one punch hit a guard, and that changed everything. Sirens screamed, tear gas filled the air. Dozens of inmates were thrown to the ground, cuffed, dragged out. It was all happening so fast, shouts, screams, chaos. Malik raised his hands, yelling, "Stop, he's just a kid," but his voice was swallowed by the noise. Guards tackled him too, slamming him to the floor. And in that instant, all the progress he'd made, all the peace he'd built, seemed to crumble. By the time order was restored, 3 inmates were injured, 1 guard was hospitalized, and the warden was furious. Dree was thrown into solitary, Vito was sent to maximum security, and Malik was back under suspicion. You think you can run a boxing class in my prison? The warden snapped. You think you're changing lives? You're just another inmate trying to play hero. Malik didn't argue. He'd been here before, the rise, the fall, the crushing silence that follows. Back in his cell that night, he sat on the edge of his bunk, staring into the darkness. For a brief moment, he wondered if he'd been wrong to try. Maybe Stonewall couldn't change. Maybe some places were too broken to fix. But then he heard something faint, echoing down the corridor, a voice, then another. Inmates were chanting softly, almost like a prayer. Champ didn't start it. Champ tried to stop it. It spread from cell to cell until the whole block was humming with it. Even the guards didn't interfere. They'd seen what Malik had done. They knew he was the reason fights had stopped for months. He was the reason hope even existed in a place where hope wasn't supposed to survive. The next day, the warden called him back in. You've got the men believing in you, he said quietly. You think you can fix what happened. Malik didn't hesitate. I don't fix people, I just remind them who they are. The warden studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. You get one more chance. You'll lead the rehabilitation group. Officially this time, you've earned it. When Malik returned to the yard, the men greeted him not as a fighter, but as a leader. Rico was there too, waiting. Heard they almost threw you in the hole again, he said, smirking. Almost, Malik replied, but I'm not done yet. Rico nodded. You shouldn't be. These boys need you. Malik looked around at the tired, scarred faces, men who had been written off by the world. And he realized this was his fight now, not the kind with gloves or crowds, the kind that changed hearts one breath at a time. He started gathering them again, this time in the chapel, where the echoes of the riots still lingered like ghosts. He spoke to them not like prisoners, but like brothers. We can't change what we've done, he said, but we can decide what we'll do next. You think strength is about breaking bones? Try forgiving someone who hurt you. Try waking up every day in here and still choosing peace. That's strength. The room was silent. Some men wiped their eyes. Even Rico looked down, jaw tight. Weeks passed and slowly Stonewall began to heal again. Malik restarted the boxing sessions, but now they were part of a program the warden himself approved, Fighters for Freedom. It wasn't just about punches anymore. It was about discipline, meditation, writing, even mentoring younger inmates. Malik poured his soul into it, and the men followed his lead. But change didn't come without pain. One night, Malik received word that Dree, still in solitary, had been attacked by guards. It broke him. He couldn't save the kid from the system's cruelty. For hours, Malik sat alone in his bunk, fists clenched, tears falling silently. He wanted to lash out, to fight back, to let the rage he'd buried for years come roaring out. But he didn't. Instead, he whispered the same words his old trainer once told him. Control the storm, or it controls you. The next morning, he went to the warden again. Let me see him, he said, please. When Malik finally stood in front of Dree, the kid was bruised, broken, but alive. Malik didn't say anything at first. He just put a hand on his shoulder. Dree looked up through swollen eyes. You were right, champ, he whispered. Fighting angry, it don't win. That single line hit Malik harder than any punch ever could. It was proof that even in pain, his message had landed. That even if the system was rotten, the hearts inside it could still grow. And from that moment, Malik made a vow, no matter what happened next, he would never let violence define him again. He'd seen what power could do in the wrong hands. Now, he would use his to lift others, even in chains. Because sometimes, the truest test of strength isn't how you fight in the ring, it's how you stand firm when the world around you is falling apart. Time inside Stonewall moved differently now. The days still dragged, the nights still echoed with distant cries and clanging metal, but something had shifted, not just in the prison, but in the men themselves. The Fighters for Freedom program had grown beyond anything Malik imagined. What started as a small boxing group had become a full-scale rehabilitation movement. Even guards volunteered to help oversee sessions, not out of duty, but out of belief. Malik had become more than an inmate. He was a symbol, a reminder that strength and goodness could exist even behind bars. Men who once settled disputes with fists now settled them with words. They wrote letters to their families, helped each other study for GEDs, and even organized a small memorial for inmates who never made it home. Stonewall, once a breeding ground for hate, was turning into a place of reflection, all because one man had refused to fight back. But for Malik, change came with humility. Every night after the sessions, he still prayed silently for forgiveness, not for the riot, not for his sentence, but for the one life he couldn't bring back, the man from years ago whose death had cost him everything. "I can't change what happened," he whispered one night, "but I can change what happens next." One morning, Malik was summoned to the warden's office again. When he arrived, two unfamiliar men were there, one in a grey suit, the other carrying a thick file. "Malik Johnson," the man in the suit said, "I'm from the parole board." Malik froze. He stopped counting the days, stopped expecting miracles. His parole hearing wasn't supposed to happen for another 2 years. The warden leaned forward. "We've been watching what you've done here, Johnson. You've turned this place upside down, and for once, that's a good thing. We're recommending an early release." For a long moment, Malik couldn't speak. The room seemed to spin. I don't deserve it," he finally said. The man in the suit smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but maybe that's what redemption looks like, doing more good than harm with the time you have left." A month later, the parole hearing was held. Rico, Pops, and several inmates wrote letters on Malik's behalf. Even the guards testified. "He didn't just change the prison," one said. "He changed the people in it." The board members listened quietly as Malik spoke. He didn't beg or plead. He simply said, "I've spent years learning that true strength is knowing when not to fight. I don't expect freedom as a reward. I only ask for a chance to use it for something better." The decision took 3 days. When the warden walked into the yard and handed Malik the papers, every man there went silent. Malik unfolded the letter, hands trembling. He didn't even have to read it out loud. The tears on his face said it all. He was going home. Rico was the first to step forward. The man who once ruled Stonewall with fear now stood before Malik with pride in his eyes. "You earned it, champ," he said, gripping his hand tightly. "But don't forget us when you walk out those gates." Malik smiled softly. "You'll always be part of my fight, brother." That night the prison was quieter than ever. Even the guards noticed the difference. No shouting, no banging, no chaos. Just silence, heavy but peaceful. The next morning, as Malik stood in front of the gates, dressed in simple grey clothes, Pops was there to see him off. "So what now?" Pops asked. Malik looked out beyond the razor wire, at the horizon that seemed wider than he remembered. "Now I fight for the right things," he said, "out there." When the gates opened and Malik stepped into the sunlight, it wasn't just freedom he felt, it was rebirth. The world was loud and alive, filled with colors he hadn't seen in years. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, the warmth on his skin. He was free not just from the prison, but from the weight he'd carried all his life. News of his release spread quickly. The same reporters who once wrote about his downfall now covered his redemption. "Former boxer reforms prison through discipline and hope," one headline read. Malik didn't care for fame anymore. He used his new beginning to build a community boxing center for at-risk youth, a place where young men could learn not just how to fight, but how to control the fight within themselves. He called it the Iron Fist Foundation, not for power, but for perseverance. And every kid who walked through those doors heard the same message. Strength isn't about hurting others. It's about having the power to choose peace. Back inside Stonewall, his absence was felt every day, but the spirit he left behind never faded. Rico took over the program, Pops mentored the younger ones, and even Dree, finally released from solitary, became a teacher himself. The legacy lived on. And sometimes, when the yard was quiet and the men shadowboxed in the afternoon sun, they'd whisper his name like a prayer, "Champ." Malik never forgot them. Every month, he returned to Stonewall as a guest instructor, walking through the gates as a free man to teach the men still inside that their worth wasn't defined by bars or mistakes. Because in the end, Malik's greatest victory wasn't the fights he won in the ring, it was the peace he found in the place he was never supposed to survive. As Malik walked through the gates of Stonewall Correctional for the last time, the sunlight struck his face like a promise. Freedom wasn't just the absence of walls, it was the culmination of every choice, every moment of restraint. every time he chose peace over anger. Behind him, Stonewall no longer echoed solely with chaos, it resonated with hope. He had changed the prison, yes, but more importantly, he had changed himself. The story of Malik Iron Fist Johnson is more than a tale of survival. It's a testament to the power of discipline, humility, and resilience. In a place built to break men, Malik proved that strength doesn't always come from violence. Sometimes it comes from teaching others to fight their inner battles. He reminded us that even in the darkest, most violent environments, one person can spark change. One voice, one action, one choice can ripple through an entire community. Rico, once feared by everyone, now stood as a mentor himself. The inmates who had once lived for fear learned to live for purpose. And Malik, from the outside, continued to be a guiding light, his Iron Fist Foundation giving young men a path away from crime, offering hope where none existed. His story demonstrates that redemption is possible, that mistakes don't have to define a life, and that even the fiercest fighter can choose to be a teacher. For those watching this video, Malik's journey carries a powerful lesson. Strength is not only about surviving battles, but about controlling the ones within ourselves. True courage is found in the decision to change, to forgive, and to guide others. It reminds us that our past does not dictate our future, and that one person's positive influence can transform an entire community. Here on Swift Tale, we bring stories like this, stories of grit, survival, and unexpected heroism. If this story inspired you, made you reflect, or moved you in any way, don't just watch it, be part of the story. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button to join our growing community. And while you're at it, leave a comment below. Which moment in Malik's journey resonated with you the most, and why? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember, every story has a lesson, and every lesson is a chance to grow. Malik's journey from inmate to mentor shows us that no matter the odds, redemption, influence, and hope are always possible, sometimes in the most unexpected places. Thank you for watching, and remember, at Swift Tale, we don't just tell stories, we bring you the tales that fight for hope, courage, and transformation. Stay inspired, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.